So now we're entering into session 5 of this Leela, and it follows on from the previous session wherein Julie spoke at length about the process directly in Beloved Adida's company, wherein she was the model for She Is Mind, the photographic suite. And she'll now move on and tell some other elements of her time with Beloved during this time in 2002.
In the last recounting of this Leela with Adida, one of the communications that he gave to me, not only verbally, but also at a very deep feeling level, at all levels of the being, gross, subtle, and causal, is about the interconnectedness between what it was that he was doing, how he was working actually in the studio, in the set, in the sequencing, in his communications about what it was that he was accomplishing. And I wanted to read just a couple things that he said that characterizes what I'm trying to communicate about how I observed his demonstration of this. He said that transcending of the body-mind in its divine source is the fundamental communication that he's making. And he said that this is very basic to the work that I do, which, as we know, is comprehensive in terms of his confessed purpose for his bright incarnation. And then there's two other brief quotes that I want to read that specifically point to this matter of the complexity of integrating or combining all of the seeming desperate and disparate views or happy views or whatever the view is of mind, or the act of mind. Adida says, "This is the first time I have done color work of significant complexity, and I wanted to develop it in many modes of approach. However, I did not just discard black and white because I was doing color. The suite as a whole shows the full range of my work, including both color and black and white. The pantonal and bitonal images emerge from one another. They have different feeling qualities. At times, you don't even necessarily register whether the imagery is black and white or color, but a feeling sense of the merging occurs. In She Is Mind, there is a combinative transition between one non-aptic and the next, such that each new non-aptic gradually emerges from the previous non-aptic, meaning an image, in a sequence, rather than appearing suddenly or apparently independently. The combinative procession of successive non-aptics suggests a fundamental, continuous, and unbroken unity from which the individual images periodically emerge in their temporary particularity." Now, this is him describing his suite process and how he's making these images and how he's combining them. But as you can feel when you listen perceptively and contemplatively in direct relationship to him, he's always speaking the truth. about the nature of reality and how it is arising. And this ties in with what I was describing about the manner in which he was revealing to me as he worked with me this integration between the work he was doing in that room, in his bright sphere, and in direct relationship to the world as a whole. And so I would notice when going from being there in the space with him, in contemplation, in the depth process, as he had me sit or stand and observe him and feel him working his bright intervention and seeing and feeling the visions, then I would move from that space and actually into a relational domain outside that space of being in the actual place where he was shooting, and then next to it into the space where he would be doing the sequencing. and then I'd go from the place where he was sequencing and putting the images in a specific, as he describes, combinative succession, and then I would be in relationship with the devotees who were serving him. And then I would observe the interactions between the devotees and him, their serving of him, to help him to continue in this process, all the way from devotees who were putting a shawl around him because he may indicate that he's cold, or they might just be sensitive to the fact that it's a bit cool in the room. And these are devotees who have been in service to him bodily, so they can actually be sensitive or read the signs. The cues of what he would need in any given moment. This is the sensitivity that he would try to develop, or would be inherently developed by being in his intimate sphere and in direct service to him bodily, in his sacred spaces. So every space that he created where he worked was and is the bright temple of being itself. So the devotees then would serve him tea, green teas, and he was gifted many different kinds of green teas that devotees would enjoy offering him and describing to him where they came from, what their qualities were, and he would taste them and then give feedback relative to how he felt in response, or what he would then maybe sometimes even end up having an interesting dialogue about where the tea came from. I mean, every exchange was a part of the relationship in terms of what was brought into his sphere and what his response was. And his response was the prasad that he would give in gratitude and blessing, and then in further instruction. And it just was this constant reciprocation. And to note that the manner in which the shoot was set up, and the fact that, as he says, he is addressing this matter of mind, where he says that, and I'll quote from his words. He said that she is mind. She, in quotes, is the mind. This suite, viewed in its entirety, is a portrait of mind, a communication about the meaning of mind and the transcendence of mind. And mind itself, this is me speaking, and mind itself can only be transcended most perfectly in the bright itself, the context of it, in which there is, in the consciousness domain, it is transcended. And there's esotericisms to this relative to understanding, as he asked me to do, understand the structures of the psychophysical mechanisms and the experiences that are associated with a specific process of how he works. And this ties in very much with what he speaks about relative to the black and white images, and then going into color, and then the sequencing or the combining of them, and the multiplicity of that, and the infinite possibilities that arise in the view of it or in the feeling of it, conceptually and perceptually. So, and oftentimes he would say the heart itself feels in black and white. In other words, otherwise you're in the white sphere of the bright, or you're in the manifest domain of the ego act itself, which is dark. Just to take that one step further, in recognition, it is what is awakened is the radical understanding that once the fist is undone and opened into the bright, in the context of the consciousness domain, what is viewed by the mind is no longer viewed as the dark, as black itself. It's actually imbued with bright light, and everything becomes incredibly clear. And the vast multiplicity of colors and differences and forms and shapes and words and sounds and thoughts, if it's actually in the context of recognition, then the fullness of it is understood and seen and viewed as non-separate from the bride itself, because it is the source condition and the unqualified light that is merely modified by virtue of being manifested in the vibratory current of light that is all pervading. And so there's an expanse of multiplicity in colors. And this is another thing that I viewed, is that going from the space where he was doing the shoot in the room, and then even just stepping outside to the next space where he was sequencing it. And that is a description actually of the manner in which the bright, unqualified light above and beyond in the room of mind, as it is apparently descends the light into the body mind, it is fractured. And then there is a sequencing of shift, change, shift, change, shift, change. And you're seeing the images, but they are manifesting, as he described, in a succession that ultimately it's understood that they're in a unity. They're not independently separate from one another. It's all integrated. This is literally, obviously so. And I understand that even more clearly and deeply and more profoundly in the retelling of this Leela. The noticing was there, as I have indicated, anytime you're in his company, there and in contemplation of him, whether you're not in his physical company, but in darshan, in recognition, the process is always reignited or initiated, and the initial recognition that is intuited becomes grown and magnified. And that is the process in direct relationship to him. And this process is extraordinary to observe, and that's the Leela of his work. And this is how he was actually showing it and revealing it to me, not just as being a model, but as a devotee in relationship to all the spaces, and in relationship to the devotees, and in relationship to the world. So what I was indicating about going into the sequencing space is that when I saw the images, as I went into the room where he was sequencing, and he would be given one, like say 5x7 or 8x11, 5x7, I think. They were actual little images that he could put onto a scaffolding where he could organize them, or he would go to his desk, and on there would be like where the dictionary was, or images of his photographic work, or really smaller ones that he could sequence there, or he would be looking at a folder or notebook that had all of his artworks that he had done either with ink or pen or pencil or photographic work. Things that were at hand. Devotees had provided him with the different details of what he needed to work with.
So how would he, in that context, if he had a photo he had taken, and then he had his dictionary as a mail form, or he had one of his other artworks, how would he then integrate those into a new image where those various images were intertwined?
Well, there would be devotees who would sit with him and he would give instructions to, or sometimes he would then say, put this on photograph this and make it possible for it to be projected. And sometimes they'd actually be projected when he would photograph in the room itself. So the images would be projected in that space that I described that was black and white, or he would give instructions, detailed instructions. I'd like this superimposed or combined. So there were many means by which a lot of devotees and talented artists would help him do that.
So he would give instruction, then the devotee or devotees would go away and recreate the image according to his instruction, then at a later time bring it back to him for him to view and to...
Yes, and this is where my capability for speaking the details of it is limited, because I wasn't a technician, and I actually wasn't the one who was taking the notes about exactly what to do and then going off and doing it. So this is why these Leelas are always necessarily told most fully by the numbers of individuals involved in it. Even as he describes, we're not even necessarily any longer in the process with him, individuals, so to speak. It's a unity, working together in service to him, the divine purpose. And this makes the Leela full and complete. And it is a constantly unfolding and growing process in his Leela.
It reminds me, just a week or so ago, we were with a dear devotee friend in the area where we live who had a wonderful experience with Adida in regards to She Is Mind. She was on retreat at this time, and on a particular day, she, for whatever reason, she wasn't quite clear, was not included in the upcoming darshan list. So she was in a hotel with a friend, waiting to see how the day would unfold. And then out of the blue, surprisingly, another devotee came to her and asked, "Are you available to do some work with Adida's photographs from She Is Mind?" And she was, of course, excited to do this. And as it turned out, she was then taken to Adida's house at Tatsundaram, and she spent many hours in the house comparing photographs to ensure the size and the integrity and their place within the sequence.
Yes, it was amazing to hear this unexpected Leela at this point in time while we were preparing to tell this Leela. I had no idea, Nick and I had no idea that this devotee had done this. But as I was describing in terms of how he would sequence the suites, he would have little teeny thumbnail images that he could work with easier just on his desk. And then he had the larger images. So this devotee was asked, "Do you have attention to detail?" And she's absolutely perfect one for this particular service. And so she spent, never having been inside of an intimate sphere of serving in this kind of capacity, was brought over to do this. And she would have to, as Nick described, she was comparing the small thumbnail prints to the larger ones and making sure that they were all in the exact same order, and that each image was exactly the same, because there was sometimes such minute details that you might not be able, of changes, that you might not be able to tell the difference from one image to the next. Like she described, "I spent hours looking at you and knowing in contemplation and darshan of beloved doing this suite, of noticing which direction your eyes were, whether you were looking up, down, or to the side." And she just said that it was an absolute incredible gift, and she received more than she could have ever asked for.
And I was astounded in hearing this Leela that she did all this within his house, having myself spent many hours over the years in various of Adida's houses, whether it was at the Mountain of Intention in the Manor of Flowers, or in Fiji in Indefinable, or Hamdazmistan. It's such a unique domain to be in the place where he lived and moved. It's so filled with his divine presence, and for this devotee friend just to suddenly out of the blue to be spending hours and hours in his intimate house was really quite mind-blowing.
Yeah, and it's happy to remember, isn't it? Her telling of that, and the timing of it, and the perfection again, the mystery of the perfection of the Leela. And this is then an example of, again, of the observation of the inherent unity and the interconnectedness, not only between what may appear to be mind as thought, feeling, perception, and conception, but also manifestly coming down into the paradoxes of synchronicity and coincidings, and how it all integrates in terms of the process of how he works. So again, this is primary to his communication, and the understanding of this inherent feeling unity, the radical understanding of no recoil, magnifies the capability to participate in darshan. This is what the devotional yoga is all about. And this is what he says, this recognition is the process, that is it, in its simplicity, and summarily so. And everything else is secondary. It's vast in its descriptions and details, but this is the fundamental yoga and process. So he's again demonstrating in another fashion the transcendence of the egoic act of the body-mind that separates itself out into the darkness as a separate self, rather than being a participant in the bright, in prior unity in service to the divine purposes of love bliss itself.